Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thank you for all who are present today, ladies and gentlemen. It is a distinct honor to have the privilege of addressing you in this year's Paris Defense and Strategy Forum. Upon the most gracious and kind invitation of my counterpart, Minister Catherine Potran. This is the Philippines' first participation in this important forum, and my first official visit to France in my capacity as my country's Secretary of National Defense. I have also been informed that this is the first time a defense minister from Southeast Asia has contributed to this important forum. My presence here aligns with our advocacy for greater cross-regional security cooperation, which I underscored during last year's Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. As it was then, so it remains. The threats and the threat actors that we face are increasingly intertwined. Asians doing battle in European soil. And in the maritime domain, we see common challenges in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific by actors of similar persuasion. As our adversaries align, we should not fragment. Against this backdrop, we have come to Paris with a call for convergence between Europe and the United States on the one hand, and between Europe and Asia on the other, to preserve the rules-based international order. I do not claim any originality with this, because this is an echo of what happened in Singapore during last year's Shangri-La Dialogue. And by convergence, we should interpret convergence in the broad sense, which means unity of purpose, where we both could either interoperate in one area or operate in our respective areas to achieve a common goal, using our own unique capabilities, expertise, and areas of influence. We should be as creative as possible to converge and to work towards convergence to address threats and mitigate vulnerabilities, of which we are seeing several now. We need no treaties to pursue such partnerships, because this is our inherent responsibility as defense officials, to protect our people, to protect others, to protect and preserve the global order. Excuse me. We need no treaties. This is immediately executory and doable. Our convergence in goal or objective is necessary to protect human life, uphold international law, and defend the territory and the territorial integrity and sovereignty of smaller and especially archipelagic countries, especially those who are besieged by larger neighbors. From our perspective, recent threats have underscored the urgent need for this. The Philippines is not directly involved in conflicts in Europe and in the Middle East. Yet, like any other country, we have felt the consequences. Most immediately through direct threats to the safety of Filipinos who are in the Middle East, 2.4 million of them. And immediately through sharp increases in commodity prices, the Philippines being a net importer of oil. Millions of Filipinos, as I said, live and work overseas. In the Middle East, 2.4. In fact, in the international arena, 1 in every 3 of a seafarer manning an international flying ship is a Filipino. 1 in 3. Our healthcare professionals form the backbone of providing healthcare to both Europeans and Americans. And much to our regret, our people have been counted among those who are casualties from attacks both on land and at sea. In this context, we need cross-regional convergence to protect human life, not only to propound state objectives and international order. In this most atomic of an endeavor, we can immediately work with each other. Evidently though, on the other context, the rules-based international order is not perfect. Yet for smaller countries like the Philippines, it is indispensable for us. We rely on international law and institutions to maintain not only for international peace and security, which is essential to our growth and survival, not only as a matter of principle, but also out of necessity. Without an expeditionary armed force, for example, the Philippines has to depend on the international system to protect our nationals, wherever they may be, while we are in the process of strengthening ourselves to enable us to do so in the future, which is an obligation from which we will not shirk, and it is an obligation which we realize. The Philippine government, under the leadership of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., is surely strengthening our capabilities to ensure the safety and well-being of overseas Filipinos. A big part of this is strengthening first our armed forces to protect our exclusive economic zone and other areas where we have jurisdiction, and thereafter to be an expeditionary armed force to protect in conjunction with all other like-minded partners, our people, and those of others who are essential to international safety, international trade, and international commerce. Our defense and security military partnerships with countries in Europe and beyond help us in this critical endeavor. Let us imagine a situation if, due to a conflict, our migrant workers, our seafarers, our healthcare workers, our occupational therapists, others that provide vital services to other countries were forced to return home or were not allowed to help others beyond the Philippines. What would happen? International shipping will be disrupted. People will will line up in hospitals, not attended to properly. The elderly, whom a lot of caregivers are Filipinos, will not be cared for. As a matter of fact, the first casualty of this conflict was a caregiver bringing her ward to a shelter. And I need to underscore that the sacrifices of these Filipinos and other Asians abroad allow European families to live comfortably while they are free to enjoy other pursuits, enable the European healthcare system to run efficiently, facilitate international trade and commerce, and provide a future pool of disciplined, literate, and dependable additions to your workforces, to include even those in the technology field. The benefits provided for by Filipinos and other Asians to Europe have an inversely proportional effect on the development and growth of our own countries. So it is not only an individual sacrifice of one who is in a foreign shore so that another can live better, but also a drain on the country's human capital resources. Therefore, I propound, because of this vital service that collectively Filipinos and other Asians or other nationals of smaller countries provide to the international order, the international order has a special obligation to protect them. Not only because their rights and dignity must be upheld, but also in vital recognition or in recognition of their vital contribution to the people that they serve. So it is clear that there is a zero-sum game when a Filipino or a national of a smaller country leaves their country. They are deprived of top quality expertise. And they come here and elsewhere to allow you to enjoy something that you would not have enjoyed, or a quality of living you would not have enjoyed were it not for that vital function. I think that is beyond debate. Therefore, we should work together, because there cannot be a benefit without an obligation. And this obligation is simply, we should work together to protect them, to protect their home countries, to protect their home countries under a shared vision of international law and shared bilateral and multilateral agreements. Meeting this obligation requires alignment among the major players who have served as the pillars of the rules-based international order. In that spirit, therefore, one of my takeaways from last year's Shangri-La Dialogue is that smaller states or Southeast Asian states cannot afford any fracture between Europe and the United States. No. Over the last 8 decades, they have jointly promoted norms that are fair, normally fair, transparent, and just, relatively, producing a long period of relative peace and prosperity throughout the world. Thus, amid tectonic shifts in our geographic landscape, the transatlantic partnership must persist and must be enhanced with new additions. For it is only through robust convergence between Europe and the United States that the global order can remain inclusive. Inclusion is a key word, where all states, irrespective of size, can engage on equal terms and their people continue to flourish unhampered and unmolested by the desires of others. In much the same way, Europe and Asia must also converge, as the sovereignty and territorial integrity of smaller countries depend on cross-regional engagements. There is a pervasive tendency to view current events solely through the lens of Sino-American strategic rivalry. While this has undoubtedly constrained the decision-making space of smaller countries, I would like to reiterate that the Philippines stands that we must not overemphasize this reality, because it tends to gloss over intentions of one country over another. Framing geopolitical developments as a function of strategic rivalry allows major powers to reduce smaller states into a situation where as if they do not exist at all. It is in this light I wish to reference President Emmanuel Macron's keynote address in last year's Shangri-La Dialogue, particularly his message that Europe and Asia share a common interest in strategic autonomy. As President Macron stated, our shared responsibility is to ensure with others that our countries are not collateral victims of imbalances to the choices made by the superpowers. For the Philippines, the strategic autonomy concept of President Macron is indeed an aspiration, rather than an immediate reality for us. Because strategic autonomy presupposes strong core defensive capabilities and relative freedom from a severe threat to one's own territorial integrity and sovereignty by a stronger power. The pursuit of strategic autonomy to attain the conditions where we can choose a path of strategic autonomy is why sustained European engagement matters to smaller states of Southeast Asia. The presence of European countries expands our strategic options, creating a third wave, as envisioned in France's Indo-Pacific strategy. This is why we welcome the European Union's security and defense partnerships with Australia, announced just yesterday, and with India, adopted in January. Both countries, Australia and India, have strong defense partnerships with the Philippines. And we are hopeful that the partnerships so entered and with Australia yesterday are only the beginning of partnerships within our regions. There is nowhere else to go but more inclusion and up. As the President of the European Commission, Madame Ursula von Leyen stated before the Australian Parliament yesterday, and I quote, "Stability in the Indo-Pacific is our common goal," unquote. That sums it up very nicely. Europe's contribution to our region lies in its political and normative influence. With Denmark as the country of honor in this year's call, I wish to cite as yet unpublished work of my colleague and dear friend, Ambassador Franz Michael Skjold Melvin, the Danish ambassador to the Philippines, who probably some of you know in his work in NATO and with the UN. He wrote, and I quote, "What Europe does best is to reinforce the legal principles of free navigation and support the legitimacy of regional actors that depend on international law as their first line of defense against predatory behavior. Europe lends valuable moral weight to deterrence, even as it is compelled to focus more on challenges closer to home." In that spirit, the Philippines is grateful to France and other like-minded partners in Europe for their support for international law, particularly the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the 2016 Arbitral Award on the South China Sea. This year marks the 10th year anniversary of this historic award. This landmark ruling affirmed UNCLOS as the peremptory document that defines maritime entitlements, and no amount of contrivance or distortion can derogate from it. Yet, the People's Republic of China, upon which this award is legally binding, not only continues to ignore it, but is actively waging a campaign of misinformation and disinformation at all levels to nullify. The activities of China in this sphere are well publicized to the world because of the transparency initiative in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, which has been entered into by several interested countries, particularly the Philippines. Even in domestic issues and politics, China continues to wage a campaign in order to undermine our determination to pursue our rightful claims under international law. Yet, my presence here signals the commitment of the Marcos administration not to waver, but to stay the course for our own people and especially for future generations. Against this backdrop, cross-regional convergence is essential to upholding international law and safeguarding smaller countries, especially archipelagic ones, once again, whose communities rely on the bounty of the sea. This is why we fought for UNCLOS in the first place. We recall that in the late 20th century, the Chinese government advocated for UNCLOS based on the rationale of anti-hegemony. China aligned itself with developing countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. For instance, in 1974, it very strongly and consistently advocated for a robust regime for the exclusive economic zone, arguing that it was entirely proper and reasonable for the developing states to defend their national sovereignty, safeguarding their natural resources, and develop their national economies after having, quote, long suffered from aggression and plunder at the hands of colonialists and imperialists, unquote. I wish to remind them of those words. Now that the shoe is on the other foot, it seems to have been lost somewhere. And we are following what they preached. So how can we be wrong? They are harming the archipelagic countries that the law was designed to shield against the unilateral actions of stronger states. So I will make the case on that. In the face of these challenges, it's important to know, diplomacy is important, but it has its limits. Our diplomatic efforts complement our national security, but they cannot substitute for a credible deterrent posture, which is why we are all here as defense professionals. Because without a strong backbone, smaller countries risk having their agency usurped by major powers. As I am sure you will understand, being defense and military practitioners, we also need deterrence. Recently, NATO countries committed to spending 5% of their GDP on defense. The Philippines, like its neighbors in Southeast Asia, is likewise strengthening, albeit in a less drastic way because of the fact that our budgets are constrained for basic human necessities and infrastructure. However, we realize that a defense capability upgrade is long overdue. And the sad lesson we learned here in the European continent cannot be neglected, because it will bite you at the time you least expect it, and to transition to augmenting your defense deterrence capabilities will be very painful. The challenge now is how to ensure these capabilities are used to pursue an end that we all share: the defense of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democratic freedoms around the world. These ideals are not new to us. It was from here, on this continent, after we were colonized from this continent, that our forebears had their first taste of freedom, which influenced their emerging national consciousness and eventually our struggle for independence. The roots and ideas were perfected in this continent. Indeed, our national hero, Jose Rizal, spent part of his youth here in Paris. In 1883, he wrote to his parents about Voltaire and Rousseau, two Enlightenment figures which he described as the fathers of modern thought. Another of our heroes, Andres Bonifacio, never set foot in France. Yet he too was inspired by the French Revolution and its ideals of liberté, égalité, and fraternité. I hope I pronounced that right. Then as now, we share the same values. And it is on this shared foundation that we must continue to converge and bridge the distance between Europe and Asia. I hope I have done justice to my task to make the case for cross-regional convergence, no matter how remote, and I will be ready to take any questions. Thank you very much for your